Hi everyone, Leah here from EurekaCrystalBeads.com with another fun beading video for you. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to go check out the rest of our channel, and if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and notification bell, and you'll always know when we're posting new content. So today what I have for you is a wonderfully basic beginner video. So this is going to be how to string a bracelet. And not only are we going to show you how to string a basic beautiful bracelet, but I'm going to show you some lovely little tips and techniques to make it look truly professional by using a couple additional little pieces. So first of all, let me show you what we're working with here. I have a tiara cast toggle. I have little crimp beads. These are tube crimps, which is my preferred style as opposed to the round crimps. And I have crimp covers. This is sort of the first thing that's going to make your bracelet look extra beautiful and finished and professional, is those crimp covers that are going to cover over our crimp beads. We also have what's called French wire. If you've never worked with this before, this is actually a staple of mine. Whenever I string bracelets, I always utilize French wire. This is going to cover up the wire where it hooks onto your clasp. So it's going to look very clean and very neat. And it's also going to help protect that wire. So I'll show you how to use that in a minute. And then lastly, we have our softflex beading wire. And I have my beads already strung on because there's no need for you guys to sit here watching me string beads. So what I'm using for my beads, for my bracelet, are little 3mm Swarovski crystal bicones in crystal AB. And I have my personal favorite Swarovski pearl, which is platinum. And I personally love this pearl because it's so beautifully neutral and soft, and it goes fabulous with gold or silver. So it's sort of my personal go-to. I tend to like a lot of those very neutrally colors. Now, if you've worked with softflex before, you may be used to the softflex that is a gray color. Softflex does come in other colors. I always like to have secondarily on hand either a white or a bright silver Swarovski softflex beading wire, because in this case I'm using clear or clear AB crystals. And sometimes what can happen is if you're using the gray softflex, that grayness can show through the crystals. So I think a good second option to have on hand is like I said, this is the white, but then there's also nice bright silver. This way it doesn't make those crystals look at all dingy or dark inside because the gray of the softflex. So I always have both in my arsenal. This particular size, by the way, is the fine diameter of the softflex beading wire. Okay, so you'll notice one of the things I did was I strung my beads while my softflex was still attached to my spool. This is a little trick because that way, as I'm stringing, I don't have to worry about my beads falling off the other side of a piece of wire that I have already cut. So that's a good little tip. So since I think we can all manage to understand how I strung beads, I'm going to go right into the actual crimping. We have a lot of customers that do a lot of bead weaving. So weaving with a thread and needle, and we may have many bead weavers that are not as familiar with doing such a basic technique. So this is, I think, really great for even an advanced jewelry maker who just hasn't done sort of basic stringing yet, in addition to a complete and total beginner to the jewelry making world. So what I'm going to do is string on my little tube crimp, just like that. It's a nice little perfect smooth cylinder. And now we get to our French wire. So French wire is very, very delicate. If I were to take this and pull, it comes apart and unravels very easily. But when you use a nice tiny piece of it, it is beautifully strong. So I'm going to cut the two pieces that I'm going to need, one for one side of the bracelet, one for the other. And I'm just going to use my softflex cutters to do that. And I'm going to cut about 1/4 inch or so. And you can see it cuts very, very easily. You will get, out of one little package, one little inexpensive package of French wire, you will get many, many projects, and we carry in both silver and gold. So after I strung my crimp on, I'm now going to string through my French wire. It's hollow, actually. It's a little hollow tube, a very fine, fine, fine wire that's wrapped into a tube. And I'm going to go to my clasp here, my tiara cast toggle. And I'm going to thread my wire right through, and it's going to just float right over that French wire. And now I'm going to feed my wire back through my crimp bead, and I'm going to give you a nice close-up of this. Just like that. It's just going to feed right back through. And as I push my crimp up to the clasp, you'll notice that my French wire is very nicely and neatly and cleanly covering up my soft flex. So it's a beautiful finished look to a bracelet. Okay, now we're moving on to our crimper tool. So if you've never used a crimper tool before, it has two little chambers in it, and you just want to use a standard crimper tool. There's all sorts of crimper tools. There's the micro crimper, which is meant for crimp beads that are much, much tinier than this. There is, the magical crimper and the mighty crimper, and, that would be for, crimps that are larger than this. This is your standard crimper tool, and this is a standard 2mm crimp bead. And so if you can look up close, there we go. You'll see that the very front chamber is just sort of like a little oval, and the second chamber looks like a little pair of lips or a kidney bean. So it's important to note the distinction between those two, so that way you know which one we're going to be using first. And we will be using the kidney bean first. So we're going to squish the crimp, and because we're using that kidney bean chamber, we're going to not quite be squishing our crimp completely flat. We're actually going to turn it into what looks like a kidney bean. So I'm going to gently place my crimp bead into that chamber, and I want to make sure before I do any squishing that my placement is correct. Don't be too trigger happy to squish that crimp. Make sure that, first of all, only the crimp is in your crimper jaws. You want to make sure none of your French wire is in your crimper jaws, because we don't want to squish that. And you want to make sure that your entire crimp is in your crimper jaws and no part of the crimp is sticking out. And then you just gently squish. And as with most things, it really doesn't take much pressure, but it takes the right placement. So, let me give you a nice little close-up. We now have our crimp. That is a little kidney bean. You can see it has that little groove running right down the center of it. Just like that. So now we're going to take that little kidney bean and we're going to put it up on its side in the front chamber. And I will give you a nice good close-up of this. Let me see, let me get you just the right angle here. There you go. So it's up on its side. So within the jaws of those pliers, our crimp is like this, and we're going to squish it shut, just like that. And just squish. And again, of course, before we're squishing, we want to make sure that the entire crimp is within the jaws of the pliers and nothing else is in the jaws of the pliers that shouldn't be there. And you always want to make sure you give this a nice tug. Make sure it's not going to slip and go anywhere. Now, I am going to trim down my tail. However, I am not going to trim it completely down, because if you're able to, it is always best to leave some of your tail here and feed some of your first few beads over it. This way, should your crimp ever fail, maybe you didn't squish hard enough or whatnot, if the wire starts to pull out of the crimp, you have some time to catch it. So you'll see this loop up here getting bigger because your tail is slipping out into it. So it gives you some time to catch it before your bracelet falls off. So if you can help it, you never want to snip this tail off right down at the crimp. So I'll show you how I'm going to snip this off. I'm going to use my softflex cutters here. And the thing with softflex cutters, if I can give you another little tip, is they are the most wonderful tool for cutting softflex or your various beading wires. Make sure you're not cutting other types of wires with them. Don't cut head pins or harder wires with them, because you'll end up dulling them and then they won't work well for your softflex. So always make sure that you have your regular side cutter for any types of hard wires, and you have your softflex cutter strictly for your flexible beading wires. Okay, so now I can show you how we can just slide these first few beads over that tail of wire. And I do recommend trying to get that to happen. If the beads that you've picked for your design simply have holes that are too small and they don't want to slide over that wire, consider starting and ending your design with some very neutral beads that would work. So for example, I'm using a silver clasp, so if these beads didn't want to slide over that tail, I could start and end the design with a few simple silver beads that would blend right into this area, and that would allow me to not have to cut my tail quite as close. But as you can see, I was able to slide my crystal over it, and now my pearl. And so it's a very clean look to the bracelet. And I will show you the crimp covers in a minute. I usually do those last. So now you would string on all your beads, which I already have here. I'm gonna cut my wire, leaving about 1.5 inches, 2 inches or so, just like that. I'll give you a nice, good close-up. And we're going to stick on that crimp bead. We're gonna cut another little piece of our French wire. And we're going to thread that wire through the loop of the other side of our clasp. And now when we thread it back down through the crimp bead, we're going to also thread it down through those first couple of beads at the same time and then pull it all tight together. I'll give you another good close-up of that. So down through the crimp bead, down through the crystal, and through that first pearl. Oops, let me pull my tail just a little bit longer. Okay, so we can see that tail popping out of the other side. Now you're going to grab that little tail and you're going to grab your clasp and you're going to pull in the direction towards your bracelet. And that's what's going to get everything to tighten up nicely. You don't want to pull away like this. That's not going to get your bracelet to tighten up nicely. You want to make sure that you are pulling this tail of wire parallel to the bracelet, heading down towards the other side. So again, you're just holding that clasp and pulling down in this direction. Now, it's okay if your bracelet has a little bit of wiggle room, because something to keep in mind is that when it's clasped, it's actually going to tighten up a little bit. So some may prefer, depending on the types of beads you used, to do this, this pulling while you have it clasped into a circle, to give you a more realistic idea of how tightly your beads are going to sit when the bracelet's being worn. Okay, so now we're going to go to our crimper tool here. We're going to stick it right into our second chamber, the chamber that's closer to your hand. Give it a squish. Put our kidney bean up on its side vertically. Put it in the front chamber. And this part can be tricky for people because you want your kidney bean to be perfectly upright. If it's at all sitting a little forward or a little backwards, it can just sometimes just snap back or snap forward. You'll know you have it as you start to squish because you'll feel that resistance. There we go. Now we use our softflex cutters to get in there nice and close. And that is where we could be finished, but I'm going to show you the crimp covers because I find that they truly finish off a bracelet. Now, my little trick for the crimp covers is I love using my crimper tool. That front chamber, that oval, I just think is the best little trick for crimp covers. I'm going to stick my crimp cover, which basically looks like a silver bead that's been sliced open on one side and pried open. That's what it looks like. I'm going to stick that sitting upright right into the front of the jaw of my crimper tool. Coincidentally, this is also the way, in case it's helpful to see it a little bit bigger, how you want that kidney bean shape of your crimp to sit in there as well, kind of up like a C. And I'm holding this just enough to grip the crimp cover. I'm not squishing at all. I'm not using any pressure because I don't want to do that until I have it fitted around my actual crimp bead. And then you just gently squish. It takes very little pressure, but just the right angle. So sometimes they can take a little practice. And then to get that seam nicely shut, I put it seam up into that front chamber and I squish it just ever so barely. What you'll end up seeing is the littlest bit of a seam, but that'll be pretty much invisible if it's done correctly. But it takes that area and it makes it look just like a silver bead. Clean and neat. So let me get that other crimp bead, or crimp cover on there. On the other side, I get it fitted on there using the crimper tool. I position it then with my fingers. And we just gently shut it. And then again, I put it seam up to nudge that seam shut. That last little bit, and I am barely squeezing. That's how little pressure it takes. So let me give you another nice close-up. So it is a beautifully clean way to finish a simple bracelet. Now, if you're just starting out and you want to do some practice, string your beads up, just use your crimp bead and thread the wire through the loop of your clasp back through the crimp bead and crimp it. But if you really want to make some very lovely gifts, if you're looking to sell your jewelry, these techniques really add to the professionalism in your final product, using that French wire, using those crimp covers, and in addition, using good quality crimp beads. If you are using poor quality crimp beads, which are usually the kind that you can find in craft stores, your bracelet may not, or whatever your jewelry is, may not be held together as well as you might want. And while that little tiny bead of metal is so small, it really is what makes or breaks whatever you're making. It holds it together or lets it fall apart. So use good quality crimps, and then everything else will hold together beautifully. So this is just your basic strung bracelet, finished neatly, cleanly, and professionally. And yeah, that's it, folks. I'm going to link you below to everything that I used in the video over on EurekaCrystalBeads.com. If you're on Facebook, make sure to check us out. We just started a new beaders group called the Beaders Nook at Eureka Crystal Beads. And it's where all of you wonderful beaders are getting together and you're playing show and tell, and you're asking questions, and you're giving great tips and techniques, and you're all getting to interact together and with me in a really fun beading family type environment. So we'll link you below to that as well if you want to come check us out and become a member. So that is it, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.